Good afternoon, folks. Thanks for joining this short, quick live session. Today we're going to look at a few different ways of mask creation, and what we're going to do is problem solve on this particular shot and look at trying to achieve the same thing but doing probably 5 or 6 different ways of creating the mask, so you can see the difference, see the benefits, see what works best, and so on. So that is the plan for today. So welcome to those of you on Facebook and YouTube. So let's get started. First of all, this is a shot from, whoops, let's not do that. First of all, this is a shot from Robin Sina, based out of the UK. So thanks, Robin, for this photograph. Before we do anything else, we are going to make a brand new empty variant so we can see the picture as it came out of the camera. And the reason why I've picked this one, a couple of reasons, is that, hang on, I'm just going to turn myself up a bit. A couple of reasons is that we've got a great sky there, but we've got this guy here whose head is just peeking into the clouds. So if we wanted to do something like, so you're saying sound is poor. Hang on a second. Oh, I know why. Hang on, guys. How about that? That should be better. So I'll tell you why, because it was this guy that was plugged in, not this guy. So hence the low volume, because I was recording some tutorials earlier using a different microphone. So now it should be okay. So sorry about that. Probably too loud now, I would think. So let's turn it down a bit. All right. Okay, so let's start again. Apologies for that. So as I said, this shot here, Robin Sina, thanks for supplying the photo. The second reason that we're going to use this photo is that, let's say we want to do something to the sky. So if I just pull the exposure down, you can see that we've got lots of good detail there to make it look a bit more dramatic and look a bit more interesting. The interesting thing here is this guy's head is just popping into the background. So if we're going to do any selective darkening of the sky, we want to make sure that it's not affecting here. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can do this using all kinds of different techniques. So we're going to run through those and see which one is the best. And then it's a good little exercise just to see the different ways to create masks. Now we could probably spend about 2 hours doing this, but I picked out this image just because I thought it made sense. Okay, so first of all, let's just bring up this, not that. Terribly well prepared today, aren't I? Let's just bring up the little mouse highlighter. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is just throw in some basic edits before we do anything else. So the shot looks pretty good. Exposure-wise, it's looking pretty bang on out of camera. Let's just do a quick auto levels. We're adding a bit more clarity. Let's open up the shadows and drop the blacks down a bit as well, so it's a bit punchier, and I'm just going to desaturate ever so slightly. Basic adjustments. Now just grabbing the exposure and looking at the sky, we can see we've got lots of nice detail in there, as I said earlier. So we want to separate that out. So what different techniques could we do that? Well, let's just try something really basic and try to do it with a brush. So if I grab my brush over here, we're going to right click and check for the settings, full opacity and flow, no other fancy stuff. We're just going to try and do it by hand. So if we start to mask, M on your keyboard to mask, and then I'm going to do my best to just draw and quickly around it, because the idea is that we want to achieve what we want to do also nice and fast as well, without having to fiddle around for ages doing little tiny things. So can we get away with a pretty ropey rough mask like that? First tip, if you right click on your layer, you'll find a whole bunch of different options that we can go into. One of them is fill mask. So if we hit fill, it's going to fill in the middle just to save you having to draw like a maniac in the middle. So there's our pretty ropey rough mask. How's that going to look if we want to then do something more interesting with the sky? Can we get away with it? So I'm going to pull down the brightness. We're going to add a bit more clarity. you can already see what's going wrong, and we're going to pull the highlights down a bit as well. So whilst the clouds look great, obviously this isn't super nice along the hillside here. So what we could do is grab our eraser, make that a little bit on the smaller side, and then try and nibble away at these different areas. But before long, we're probably going to end up in a situation like this, and it doesn't look great. So for these complicated things, this doesn't make sense. So let's just remind ourselves what this is. We're going to call that brush only, and then turn that off, and then we'll try a different technique. So what about a gradient mask? So a gradient mask is obviously going to be able to do what we want to achieve, but how's it going to look on the shot? Does it present any problems? So let's make another layer. We're going to call this one grad. David, you're well ahead of us. David says, after filling the mask, I always refine the mask. So let's have a look at that later on as well. Let's try a gradient mask. So I'm going to grab the grad, get a slightly different looking cursor, as you can see. Where I start drawing the mask will be its strongest, and where I finish, that's where the mark is at its weakest. Second tip, if you hold down Shift on your keyboard, that's going to make my mask nice and straight. It's going to lock it horizontally. So there we have a basic gradient mask. If I press M on the keyboard, you can see how the mask looks, like so. Now these three lines, this equates to 100% opacity, 50% in the middle, 0 by the time we've got to the third line. If you would prefer that not to be symmetrical, i.e. the same kind of fall off on either side of that central line, then you can hold down Alt or Option on your keyboard, and then we can pull this up a little bit as well. So that will make our fall off a bit more dramatic. So it's probably in the right place for the sky. If we finish it too early, we're probably not going to get enough, but let's just go somewhere around here. So what did we do on brush only? We pulled down our brightness a bit, we pulled down the highlights, and we added a bit more clarity. It's not having much effect here, so let's just drop that down a bit like so. Not bad. Lot better attempt than just brush only. Only slight issue which we might have on this kind of shot is that our grad is obviously just peeking down into this area, and if we were critical about this spot, we might not want, you know, any darkening on this particular area. But in terms of natural realism, that actually looks pretty good. So don't forget, at any point you can always adjust the grad to look exactly how you want. So we can make the fall off harder, we can make it, you know, softer, and so on. So you might think, okay, in this situation I could just edit the mask a little bit. So if I grab my erase brush and then try to, let's just make my eraser a bit softer and larger, and just try to perhaps erase out this gentleman here a little bit, what happens? So I get this warning that comes up. This operation requires the mask to be rasterized. So I can't edit the parametric mask any longer. What on earth does that mean? Well, as we've seen, if we started drawing with our grad mask, we can always go ahead and edit it, change it, you know, modify it however we want. But if I try to erase a little bit of it, then I get the warning. So what rasterize does, I can click it here if I wish, is lock the mask as it is, as if I'd drawn it by hand. We can also access the rasterize option by right clicking on your layer as well. So we could try that. So if I say rasterize mask, my mask now looks like this. And then if I want to, I can erase little bits of it. So with my settings like so, I can do so. So I could think, well, let's just erase this little bit of this gentleman and this lady here, which is not bad. That actually also works quite well. So if we turn grad on and off, you can see what's going on. But probably if we examined a little bit closer and we look at the mask, we can see now we've got a bit of a halo around his head. So what I could do, of course, is make my brush a bit smaller, take a bit more care, and so forth. If we just undo that for a second, let's step back. Another better tactic always, when you're working with manual brushes, is to take your flow down to something much lower. And what does flow do? That simply reduces the effect of the brush per brush stroke. So with my razor brush on a low flow, it means as I erase on the back of the gentleman here, it's erasing it gradually. So every brush stroke is 8% of that mask. So it generally tends to give you a better and more natural result. So that's another technique you can try as well. But again, it's still not super accurate. So if we look at our 1 minute, let's look at our display grayscale mask. And grayscale masks are a really useful feature for good mask creation because it hides the image. So let's display our grayscale mask and then you can see exactly what the mask is doing underneath. So this means you can really see what's going on. Now you can see the blob here that I brushed on this guy. It's not really the best mask in the world. Visually, does it look okay? Really not too bad. So method 2, okay, certainly much better than brush only. How long did it take us to do it? So also think of that consideration as well. Something which I don't use a lot, let's make another layer and we're going to call this auto mask. Oh, that was a very low helicopter going overhead. You probably heard that. Auto mask, not something that I use a lot. The reason being is that personally, I don't feel the need to always be super accurate with masks, and it doesn't tend to be the fastest result. But it's good to know that it's there and that it does have its uses occasionally. So let's pick up our brush once again and we're going to right click and sorry, helps if I press the right button and turn on auto mask like so. Now if I make my brush a little bigger, you'll notice that we've got a third circle in the center. This is the sample zone. So this means, let's just turn on my mask for a second. Oh, just going to clear that. If you make a mistake, this is another handy right click thing in the menu. Right click to clear mask. If you've made a big pig's ear of it and you want to start again, then you can clear mask as well. So let's go just back onto the shot, make that a bit smaller. We've got full opacity and flow. The central circle is our sample line. When the second circle touches an area of differing, pixel density and so on, then it will find the edge when I let go. So now, as soon as I let go of the mouse, then it's going to find that line like so. And you can see it's pretty quick. So what I can do now is whiz along this horizon line and get ourselves a pretty neat mask like so. Now I don't need the auto mask, so let's just turn that off, and then we can do the same as before. We can go around the edges and we can right click and we can say fill mask, and away we go. Now so far out of all our techniques, that's probably or definitely has given us the most accurate result. Is it the best result? So let's turn our mask off and let's do what we were going to do again. Let's pull our highlights down. What did we do? We added a bit of clarity, we added some contrast, and we pulled the brightness down a bit as well. Now I don't know about you, that doesn't look super accurate to me. Certainly if we zoom in and we look a bit closer, we've got a funny few little bit of upsets along here. So it's not necessarily the best result that we can have. Whoops, I just managed to move the mask, sorry. Oh, I was zoomed out a little bit. I missed a bit. Hang on, let's go back in and fill that bit in because I was slightly zoomed out. So we don't mess that up. Let's just fill that little bit in as well. Always check you're zoomed out when you're filling in your mask. So we've got that result, which is not necessarily, the best that we can achieve. Is there a way to fix that? So if we zoom in and perhaps look at our grayscale mask as a little clue to see what's going on. Pretty nice job around the man's cap there. It's not too bad. Slightly duff result going over the head there, but it's a very, binary mask. Like in real life, if we were looking at this scene, would we expect such a hard cutoff between the sky and the horizon line? Probably not. So that's why it looks a little bit weird, especially if we, you know, if I pull the brightness down, you can really start to see like everything falls apart. It doesn't look very realistic. But can we improve the mask without having to redraw it? Yes, we can actually. So if we right click on our auto mask, and then we can choose something called refine mask, which David was talking about earlier. So if we click on refine mask, we get a simple dialog that pops up. And what this does is allow us with an increasing radius for the edge of the mask to spread out on either side of it and blend better into the surrounding areas. So as we increase the radius, takes a little while to calculate, you'll actually see that improves quite a bit somewhat as well. So if we have a pretty high radius, so it's nice and soft fall off, and have a little scan along the horizon, that's actually made a big positive impact. If we look at our Grayscale Mask, remember you can find it here, then you'll see exactly what's happening, like so. So the mask has bled kind of nicely into its surroundings, and depending on the size of the radius will increase that spread to a large amount, as we saw here, to a lesser extent. So that combo of doing the auto mask and the refine mask has helped it a lot. Again, is it the most realistic? Not necessarily. Our friend here, sorry, I won't attempt to pronounce your name, but why not use Luminosity Range Mask? You are way ahead of us, which is going to be our next challenge, but not the last challenge, of course. So Luminosity Range Masking kind of combines the benefit of the auto mask in this case and the refine mask all in one step. Now for us to use the Luma Range tool, then we actually have to give Capture One a mask to work with. So we can't just make a new layer. Let's do it and call that Luma, or Luminosity Range to be correct. And click on Luma. I don't have a mask to work with, so I need to have something. So what we can do is either draw a quick mask on there and then Luma that mask, or sometimes the easiest thing is just to right click and say fill mask. So now we've got a mask over the whole photo. And also another great tip for working with Luminosity maskers is to use the Grayscale Mask as we saw before, because it's a lot easier to visualize what's going on. So if we say display Grayscale Mask, excuse me, the photo disappears and now we just see what, excuse me, now we just see white. Why is that? Well, white represents fully masked, black represents no mask. So it hides the photo and just literally shows us what the mask looks like. So if we click on Luma Range, we get a second dialog which pops up like so, where we can adjust the range of luminosity. So if we pull this guy in, we want to say we want to cut out the darker areas. So as we gradually pull this across, we're going to lose the foreground, we're going to start to lose the hills in the background until we're left with some of the sky. Now I want to include all of the sky, so I'm going to pull the range out in this direction as well, and then we've got a little bit of fiddling to do to just get a nice selection like so. So this almost gives us the result if we'd done an auto mask, but to be honest, it's probably a lot faster. So if you were doing this without listening to me rabbit on about the steps, you would have filled your mask in one step, you would have brought up the Luma range, and you would be at this point much faster than using the auto mask in this situation. Now, like the auto mask, if we just apply that for a second and we zoom into 100%, we've got not a bad edge, but it's probably not the best edge going on. Again, if we were to start adjusting our sky, we're probably going to have that very binary looking fall off. So let's have a little look back into the Luma Range tool, because like the grad tool, we can always go back into Luma Range and tweak it as we wish. Now by default, radius is set to 0, so sensitivity is going to have no effect whatsoever, because with a 0 radius, it doesn't matter where we pull this slider, nothing is going to happen. So to get this slider working for us, we need to bump up our radius. Now this slider here is a bit more sophisticated than the simple refine mask because it can do two things. If we go all the way to 0, it's going to feather the edge, so you can see it got much softer. If we go all the way to the right, it's going to refine it. Obviously in the middle, it's doing a bit of a combination of the two. So if we feather and say apply and zoom out, you can see what that horizon looks like. Is that going to give us a good result? Well, let's go ahead and look. So you can see what the mask looks like. If we do our similar thing, let's pull the brightness down, let's pull down the highlights, let's have a bit of clarity. Oh dear, that looks very, very unrealistic. Believe me, you'll probably find lots of photos on the internet that actually look like this. It's just not a good selection and not very believable. So let's go back into Luma Range and we'll leave the photo up so we can see the effect. Let's pull sensitivity right across the other direction. That's not bad. So it's now done the exact opposite and refined it, but it's still a little bit weird looking here as well. So if we increase the radius, that's going to bleed better and look more realistic like so. With a very low radius, doesn't look good at all. So you can see what's going on quite nicely as we bump up the radius and gives us, you know, pretty good effect. If we turn this on and off, it's got a good effect in the background, but it's not affecting our character in the foreground. That's when, you know, editing loses all its illusion, because if what I'm doing in the background here then starts affecting the foreground, you know, you instantly flatten the image. To be honest, if I was editing this for real, this is way too much for this shot. So I would pull that, you know, opacity down and get something a bit more realistic like that, if you like, which I think, you know, looks good, nice and natural and so on. Next one. This is kind of, I feel, the best combo of what we've seen so far. Right now, if we look at our mask, we've got this kind of thing, which my feeling is, you know, it's got too much of a hard cutoff. You know, realistically, if we were looking at this shot, it wouldn't really behave in this way. So like photos you see which are edited with too much use of the high dynamic range tool, you know, there's so much detail in the shadows, there's so much detail in the highlights, it just doesn't really look natural anymore. So if we, you know, pull down all the highlights, opened up all the shadows and the blacks, you know, you just end up with a slightly strange result like that, which really doesn't look good. So, you know, we've got to be careful. We've got to have our nice natural editing going on, which certainly isn't that. So what about a good combo of some of the techniques that we've seen first of all? So let's make another layer and we're going to combine two of these together. So we're still going to use our grad filter and we're going to Luma it as well. Now you can put luminosity masks on, or luminosity restrictions on top of any mask you create. So it could be a linear gradient like we're going to do, it could be a radial gradient, it could be a mask that you've simply just drawn with a brush. So don't forget Luma Range works across a lot of different things. So we're going to grab our grad once more, we're going to draw down, I'm going to hold down shift so it stays straight. I'm going to hold my option key down to make the fall off a bit stronger. So we're going to end up with a mask that looks like this. If we do our display grayscale mask or option M, then it looks like this. Okay, what we would expect. So now we're going to make our sky look a bit more interesting. So we're going to pull our highlights down. We're going to add some more clarity. Like we said, we pull the brightness down a bit. So now our clouds are looking more interesting, but it's got that, you know, fall off going into this guy's head and so on. So we lose that 3D aspect to some extent. So looking at our grayscale mask, like so, we see this. Now there's nothing to stop us putting the luminosity range slap bang on top of that as well. So we get that nice grad fall off and we're gonna avoid some of our foreground elements. So let's hit Luma Range once more. We want to squeeze up the shadows. You'll see what happens as we gradually pull this up, and then we're going to get to a point like this, and we want to open up the brighter parts as well. So that's probably roughly where we want to go. But look at this cool thing. So we've still got our gradient mask on. If I play with this, you can see exactly what's going on. So there's a lot of calculations going on the fly at the moment. So now you can see exactly how the grad mask is interacting with the Luma range. So it means most of our adjustment is going to be up here, but it's going to fall off a little bit gradually as well. Now we've still got this slightly binary edge between foreground and background, which might not matter in this case, but just to be on the safe side, we'll bump up our radius again, and we have, you know, a bit of refinement going on in the mask too. And you can see as we pull up the radius, see, watch it spread out around our gentleman here. If we pull the radius back, it's not going to have so much of effect. So let's compromise around here a bit. Remember, we can always come back in and adjust this if we need to. So let's say apply. Let's turn off the mask so we can see what's going on. So there's our mask like so. And then now we can always go in and we can play around with it so we can see what it looks like. I'd probably go for something like that. And then pull down the opacity slightly. So now if we look at our grayscale mask, that's what we've ended up with. So we're avoiding our dude here. We've got a nice fall off. It's probably nice and natural looking, but we can always go in and play around with the result to our heart's content as well. So quite a few different ways of trying to achieve the same thing. If we just whiz back through these, brush only doesn't work so well. As David said, after drawing a mask like this, it can be a good idea to go in and say refine mask, and quite often that will actually work really well. Like if I wanted to separate, I don't know, like an animal out from a background, I've done it before with a bird perched on, you know, a twig and a very blurry out of focus background. Roughly selecting it with a mask and then refining it actually worked really well. But in this situation, you would spend way too long trying to do something like this. If we go to our grad, that actually worked pretty nicely, except for the reasons we spoke about, maybe not super realistic. Auto mask also looked good, but it was a bit too defined between sky and background. Luminosity range, things are starting to get a little bit better. And then really the ultimate of everything was the gradient plus a luminosity range gives us the most nice natural result. Thank God, good job it did, otherwise that would have destroyed all the potential arguments. Doesn't mean to say that any of these other techniques wouldn't have worked in other situations, so it's often the best tool for the job. Let's do one more, which is using a style brush. I didn't try this out earlier, so let's see how this goes. So with a style brush, let's open up the style brushes and let's have a look at light and contrast. So if we go for highlights recover and we put a little bit of highlight recovery up here. Now this has a nice low flow, so it means I can place it exactly where I want to have it and just blast it over these pieces. Now because it's recovering highlights, if I go over the gentleman here, it doesn't matter so much because he's not a highlight, so the brush isn't going to affect that. We'll have a look at what the mask looks like in a second. So that's not actually too bad. If we add contrast plus as well and just do a little bit of contrast here and there too, we could also do some burning, darken. So I'm going to make this brush a bit smaller. Again, we've got a nice low flow, so we can build it up gradually. So I could burn a bit more into the clouds as well if I wanted to. Maybe a bit darker in the top corner and in this corner. I'm just going to pull that back a little bit so it's more realistic. I'll contrast plus actually prefer it without. Well, let's just pull that back a bit as well. Highlights, recover, that did the most of it. And there we go. So that's using 3 style brushes to do a similar thing. What did we do on this one? That was, oh, we didn't actually use that layer because a style brush does it automatically. So 3 style brushes also to do a similar thing. That was also pretty fast too. The accuracy freak in me still prefers the Grad plus the Luma, but often for a quick fix, style brushes work quite nicely as well. Okay, let's just have a quick look at any other questions that Diego and Yulia haven't answered in the background. Ed says, that's a great tip I forgot about. I think that was Luma masks on top of Grads, I believe. But yeah, it's often something I forget about as well. So even, let's make another layer. If we do a radial mask, not that I would on this shot. So that's what our mask looks like. Let's look at our Grayscale Mask. And then if we did Luma Range on top of that, you know, we can also, whoops, we can also stick Luma Ranges on top of that too. So the sky is the limit. Another option, let's just clear this mask. If we grab our normal brush and we just masked along here, let's bring up the flow. If we just did a rough mask along the sky, like so, and then stuck a Luma Range on top of that, we could almost achieve a similar thing, like so. So we didn't necessarily have to fill the mask. We could have just drawn a rough mask and then lumed that as well. But to be honest, it's so quick to fill the mask, I often feel that's, you know, a faster way to do it as well. Okay, can you use a Luma Range on top of a style brush? Yeah, of course, because really all the style brush is doing, no idea what this one's going to look like. So that's our, this is our burn darken brush. So there's not a great deal of mask going on, but yes, we could stick a Luma Range on top of that as well. So yeah, anything's possible. Remember, just the style brush is another, I guess, path to create a mask, just in a more accelerated, easy way. But yes, you can stick a Luma Range on top of that as well. So yeah, sky is the limit. Okay, so thanks for joining me today, everybody. Sorry for the slightly dud microphone start at the beginning. I do apologize for that. That's because I have an audio interface with one XLR input and 2 microphones, as you can see, so I've just forgotten to switch them over. So I do apologize about that, but fortunately it doesn't happen very often. So go ahead, try out all the different things you can with masking. As I said, we could talk on this subject for a couple of hours. That's just one example, but quite interesting to see the different image result between all those various different techniques. So thanks for joining me again today. Don't forget, if you haven't subscribed on YouTube, do that. It just means that before we go live, you get a notification, and also 30 minutes before, so that way you're not going to miss out on any of our content. So see you all again soon. Have a great Tuesday. Good luck to any German friends out there playing our English friends in about half an hour. So good luck and see you all soon. Take care, everybody. Thanks and bye now.